He sat in the interrogation room for hours, spinning a web of lies so thick he almost believed them himself. He claimed he was a friend. He claimed he was a protector. But while he spoke, a lab 50 miles away was uncovering a microscopic signature on a discarded blade, DNA that proved he didn't just visit 19 Bath Street. He turned it into a tomb. On Christmas Day, while the world celebrated, a widow's act of mercy was met with a shadow's ultimate greed. This isn't just a murder, it's the anatomy of a betrayal so cold, it redefined the meaning of stranger danger in the heart of England. To understand the monster, you have to understand the mask. Thomas Grant didn't break into Lucy Clews' home. He didn't smash a window or pick a lock. He was invited. Lucy was a woman whose heart was perhaps too large for a world this sharp. Recently widowed, navigating the crushing silence of her first holiday season alone, she saw a man with nowhere to go. A man the system had forgotten. She offered him a seat at her table. She offered him the warmth of a home. She offered him a chance to be human for one night. And in return he watched her. He calculated the value of her jewelry, the weight of her grief, and the price of her life. While the rest of the town of Cannock sat down for Christmas dinner, a struggle was unfolding behind a set of closed curtains that would haunt this community for a generation. It was a struggle fueled by a desperate, hollow addiction, one that valued a few grams of powder more than the soul of a benefactor. But the story doesn't end with the silence that followed. It begins with the arrogance of what came next. The image of a man walking into a shop just days later, holding a wedding ring that still carried the warmth of a woman who had tried to save him. He thought he was clever. He thought the holiday chaos would mask the scent. He didn't realize that every step he took left a digital breadcrumb, and every lie he told was being dismantled by the very science he thought he could outrun. Tonight, we go inside the investigation that shocked Staffordshire. We peel back the layers of a cold-blooded deception to ask the question, how do you spot a predator when he's sitting at your dinner table? Thomas Grant did not look like a man who had just looked into the abyss. In the video recordings of his initial interview, there is no trembling, no sweat. He sits with a slouch that borders on boredom, a posture of practiced indifference. To the detectives across the table, he presents a face of hollow stone. When the lead investigator leans forward and speaks Lucy's name, Grant doesn't flinch. Instead he sighs. It's the sound of a man inconvenienced by a misunderstanding. I don't know what you want from me, he says, his voice a flat, monotone rasp. I was his friend. I was her guest. Why would I hurt the only person who gave me a hand up? It is a masterclass in manipulation. He offers details that seem helpful but lead nowhere, ghost stories about other men he saw hanging around the property, vague descriptions of local troublemakers. He is trying to build a bridge of empathy between himself and the law, playing the role of the misunderstood drifter. But while Grant spins his narrative in the warmth of the station, we have to go back. Back to December 29th. Back to the moment the lies began to crumble before a single word was even spoken. The officers arrived at Bath Street following a call that every policeman dreads, a welfare check that had gone cold. Outside, the world was moving on. New Year's Eve was approaching. But at number 19, time had stopped dead on the 25th. The first thing the officers noticed wasn't a smell or a sign of struggle. It was the mail. A small pile of festive cards, bright and cheerful, trapped in the door's letterbox. One heavy strike. That's all it took. The door gave way and the officers stepped into a vacuum. The air inside was thick, stagnant, and smelled of extinguished candles and copper. And there, in the corner of the living room, was the most haunting sight of all, the Christmas tree. Its lights were still plugged in, rhythmically blinking red, green, blue, casting a festive glow over a carpet that was saturated with a darkness that no light could pierce. Lucy was gone, but the house was screaming. The kitchen was a map of a struggle that she never could have won. But as the forensic teams began their grim harvest of evidence, a terrifying realization began to dawn on the lead investigators. This wasn't a hit-and-run crime. The perpetrator hadn't panicked and fled to the edges of the country. This is the twist that turned a local tragedy into a national horror. While Lucy lay in the silence of her home, Thomas Grant was still in town. He was seen at a local convenience store buying cigarettes. He was spotted at a pawn shop, casually haggling over the price of a gold necklace. He didn't hide. He didn't mourn. He used the very keys she had entrusted to him to lock her in, while he went out to spend what he called his Christmas bonus. He was living off the blood money of her kindness, walking the same streets as the family who was desperately texting her phone, wondering why she wasn't answering. He was a ghost in plain sight. And as we sit back in that interrogation room, watching him sip his water and lie to the faces of the men who had just seen the carnage he left behind, we realized the true nature of the man we're dealing with. He didn't just kill Lucy Clews. He moved into her life, took what he wanted, and waited for the world to notice. But there was one thing Thomas Grant forgot. One small, silver detail that would bridge the gap between his lies and her truth. And it was currently sitting in a velvet-lined tray in a shop just 3 blocks away. To understand why the door at 19 Bath Street was unlocked on Christmas Eve, you have to understand the woman who lived behind it. Lucy Clews was not a statistic. She was a daughter, a friend, and for a long time, one half of a whole. But by December 2021, the whole had been shattered. Lucy was 39 years old, an age where life is supposed to be in its highest gear. Instead, she found herself in a house that felt too large, surrounded by the echoes of a life she had shared with her late husband. Grief is a quiet thief. It doesn't just take the person you love, it takes your sense of security. It leaves a void that many try to fill with noise, but Lucy filled it with kindness. She was a Cannock girl through and through. In West Chadsmoor, reputation is built over decades, not days. Lucy was known as the woman who would stop for a chat when the wind was biting, the one who noticed when a neighbor's curtains stayed closed too long. She was the fabric of a community that was itself beginning to fray at the edges. West Chadsmoor was once a place of coal and iron, a town built on the literal backbone of England. But as the mines closed and the industry withered, a different kind of shadow crept in. The kind of shadow that Thomas Grant thrived in. The town had become a place of contrasts. Families who had lived there for generations and a drifting population of the unseen, moving between hostels and street corners. This is the ghost town dynamic. In a place where everyone used to know everyone, the arrival of a stranger was once an event. Now it was just another face in the rain. Lucy, however, still lived by the old code. She believed in the sanctity of the hearth. She believed that no one, regardless of their demons, should be shivering on the street when the church bells rang for the nativity. But here is the detail the headlines often missed. Lucy wasn't just kind. She was struggling. Experts in the psychology of grief often talk about altruistic healing, the desperate need to help others because you cannot help yourself. By inviting Thomas Grant in, Lucy wasn't just giving him a roof. She was trying to give herself a purpose. She was trying to prove that the world was still good, even if her own world had ended when she became a widow. Thomas Grant knew this. Predators like Grant possess a broken kind of radar. They can smell the scent of a giver from a mile away. He didn't see a woman in mourning. He saw an open door. He saw a house filled with the mementos of a marriage, jewelry, electronics, a life's worth of small treasures, and a woman who would be too polite to ask him to leave when the sun went down. The vulnerability was compounded by the timing. Christmas in a small town like Cannock is a double-edged sword. It's a time of intense community, but for the lonely, it is a magnifying glass for their isolation. The ghost town becomes a silent town. Police records show that domestic calls and welfare checks spike during this window because the silence behind closed doors becomes deafening. Neighbors remember seeing Lucy in the days leading up to the 25th. She seemed distracted, some said. Hopeful, said others. She had mentioned she was helping a friend get back on his feet. It was a classic Lucy move. But the friend was a man whose feet were firmly planted in a world of narcotics and nihilism. A man who looked at a Christmas dinner and saw only the silver cutlery. As the sun set on Christmas Eve, the trap was set, not by Lucy but by her own heart. The ghost town went to sleep, tucked in by the promise of a peaceful morning. But inside number 19, the guest was no longer a guest. The mask was beginning to slip. And the most terrifying part? Lucy likely noticed the change in his eyes, but she was too kind to believe her own instinct. We often ask, how could she let him in? But the real question, the one that the prosecution would later hammer home to the jury, was, how could he stay there after what he did? Because the evidence would show that after the violence, after the light left Lucy's eyes, Thomas Grant didn't flee. He sat down. He made himself at home in a house of the dead. The intersection of two lives is rarely a straight line. It is a series of jagged, unfortunate corners. On Christmas Eve 2021, the paths of Lucy Clews and Thomas Grant finally converged, creating a collision that the town of Cannock still hasn't recovered from. But to understand the how, we have to look at the who. Because Thomas Grant was a man who had spent his entire life learning how to disappear into the background. Grant was 28 years old, but he carried the weathered exhaustion of a man much older. He was a nomad of the local streets, a man of no fixed abode, a phrase that appears in police reports like a warning label. His criminal record was a tedious litany of small-scale desperation: shoplifting, minor drug possession, petty thefts. He was a nuisance to the state, but he hadn't yet been branded a monster. He was the kind of man people looked past, not at. While Lucy was preparing for a holiday defined by memory, Grant was preparing for a holiday defined by survival. He was deep in the throes of an addiction that had stripped away his empathy, leaving only the primal urge for the next fix. When he encountered Lucy, likely through a mutual acquaintance or a chance meeting in the cold, he didn't see a woman. He saw a resource. A set of walls, a warm radiator, and a collection of things that could be turned into cash. The reconstruction of that evening is a chilling exercise in what-ifs. Witnesses recall the weather. It was a damp, biting cold that soaked through your coat. The kind of night where you don't stay outside a second longer than you have to. By 8 p.m., Bath Street was a canyon of drawn curtains and flickering television sets. The world had turned inward. No one was looking at number 19. No one saw the door open for the man who would never let her see the morning. Inside, the atmosphere was a fragile fiction. Imagine the scene: Lucy trying to be the perfect host, perhaps offering Grant a cup of tea or a plate of food. She is talking, filling the silence she has lived in for months. While he is silent, his eyes darting toward her wrists, her neck, the shelf where she kept her husband's things. The curiosity gap here is haunting. What was the exact moment the conversation stopped? What was the last thing Lucy said before the guest became the intruder? People often ask why the neighbors heard nothing. It's a terrace street, they say. The walls are thin. But Christmas Eve is a night of intentional noise. People have their music up. The Queen's speech or holiday specials are blaring. Children are laughing. In the cacophony of a street celebrating, a struggle in one room becomes just another muffled sound. A thud that sounds like a fallen box. A cry that sounds like a cheering relative. The holiday provided the perfect acoustic cover for a tragedy. Thomas Grant's history shows a man who was spiraling. He had run out of bridges to burn. He was at a terminal velocity of addiction where the consequences of the future were invisible compared to the needs of the present. This is the psychological twist. Grant didn't go there to kill. He went there because he had nowhere else to go, and once inside, the sight of Lucy's modest wealth triggered a catastrophic collapse of his remaining humanity. As the clock struck midnight, marking the arrival of Christmas Day, the violence reached its peak. The struggle was not quick. The forensic evidence suggests a desperate, prolonged effort by Lucy to save herself in the one place she should have been safe. And then, the silence returned. A silence that would last for 4 days. While Lucy lay still, Grant did something that reveals the true depth of his depravity. He didn't run. He didn't panic. He stayed. He used the shower. He helped himself to the house. He treated the crime scene like a waiting room. He spent the early hours of Christmas Day processing his loot, deciding which pieces of Lucy's life were worth a few pounds and which were worthless. On the morning of December 26th, Boxing Day, a neighbor glanced out their window. They saw a man walking down the path of number 19. He was carrying a bag, moving with a calm, purposeful stride. He didn't look like a thief. He didn't look like a murderer. He looked like a man who had just finished a holiday visit with his family. The neighbor turned back to their own family, thinking nothing of it. They assumed the man was a nephew or perhaps a brother helping Lucy with her trash. They assumed she was inside, washing the breakfast dishes, perhaps smiling about a nice Christmas spent with company. They couldn't have been more wrong. Because while that man walked toward the town center to sell a dead woman's wedding ring, Lucy Clews was still in that house, and she wasn't alone. The silence that fell over 19 Bath Street on Christmas Day was absolute. But outside, the world was alive, albeit sluggishly, with the afterglow of the holiday. For 4 agonizing days, from December 25th to December 29th, Lucy Clews lay undiscovered. While her family's texts went unanswered and their phone calls rang into the void, her killer was moving among them, a spectral figure weaving through the festive lull of Cannock. Thomas Grant, having committed the unthinkable, didn't flee. This defiance of criminal logic is what makes his actions so chilling. He didn't race for the motorway, didn't book a ferry out of the country. Instead he walked. He walked into the heart of the town, not once looking back, carrying the physical remnants of Lucy's life in a bag. His first priority, Lucy's mobile phone. A modern-day tether to a person's existence. Grant knew its value not just for communication, but as a digital key to her bank accounts, her contacts, her entire connected world. He attempted to wipe it clean to make it his own. But in the age of omnipresent data, every keystroke, every connection, leaves a trace. The digital trail led to a small independent phone repair shop. Grant, cloaked in an air of nonchalance, walked in, attempting to sell what he claimed was his old phone. The shop owner, used to such transactions, asked for ID. This was Grant's first stumble in the digital labyrinth. He didn't have legitimate ID. The transaction failed. The phone remained Lucy's, and its final GPS ping before it was eventually discarded would become a crucial piece of the puzzle. But the phone wasn't his only target. Remember the wedding ring? The ultimate symbol of Lucy's lost love. Grant, with astonishing brazenness, walked into a local pawnbroker on Boxing Day, the very day after the murder. The ring was presented, gleaming under the harsh store lights. He got £80 for it. £80 for a lifetime of memories, for a sacred vow. The pawnbroker, by law, recorded the transaction. They took Grant's details, or rather the false details he provided, a common tactic for small-time criminals. But they also logged the item. And crucially, a clear CCTV camera captured his face, his movements, the exact time. He might have thought he was a ghost, but the cameras of Cannock were his silent, ever-present witnesses. Now, imagine yourself a neighbor on Bath Street during those lost days. The festive lights are still twinkling, but something feels off. The curtains at number 19 remain drawn during the day. The car hasn't moved. The bins aren't out. The small pile of mail in the letterbox grows. What would you do? Would you dismiss it as a post-Christmas trip away? Or would a cold dread begin to settle in your stomach, whispering that something was terribly wrong? This is the insidious nature of the lost days. In the space between Christmas joy and New Year's resolutions, the very human tendency to assume the best, to give people their privacy, became a shield for a killer. The quiet hum of community was inadvertently protecting a monster. While Grant moved through town, spending his ill-gotten gains on drugs, food, and temporary solace, the first tendrils of concern began to snake around Lucy's family. Her mother, who hadn't heard from her daughter for days, made increasingly frantic calls. Lucy was always so reliable, always so thoughtful. This silence was unnatural. This silence was a scream. The mother's instincts, sharpened by love, became the catalyst. On December 29th, unable to ignore the growing dread, she asked the police to perform a welfare check. It was a knock on the door that Thomas Grant had carefully locked from the outside. A door that had stood silently for 4 days, guarding a secret so profound it would tear the quiet fabric of West Chadsmoor apart. The police arrived, professional and by the book. They followed protocol. They knocked. They called out. When there was no answer, the decision was made. A single, decisive kick. The door burst open and the cold, stagnant air of 19 Bath Street finally met the outside world. And in that moment, the lost days ended. But the real nightmare, the nightmare of discovery, had only just begun. The moment a crime scene is breached, a clock begins to tick, not forward but backward. Investigators are no longer looking for the living. They are looking for the ghosts of the past. At 19 Bath Street, the forensic team stepped into a frozen moment. To the untrained eye, it was chaos. To the scenes of crime officers, SOCOs, it was a library of evidence waiting to be read. The investigation began with the path of entry. In many cases, this is where the story starts. A broken latch, a forced window. But here the house was sealed tight. There was no sign of a break-in. This immediately narrowed the scope. Lucy Clews had either known her attacker, or she had been betrayed by someone she trusted enough to hold a key. Detectives moved into the kitchen, the epicenter of the struggle. This is where the detective work becomes a meticulous, agonizing process. Every fiber, every droplet, every hair is a potential witness. Using ultraviolet light, the team began to map the movement of the perpetrator. They weren't just looking for DNA, they were looking for a signature, a mistake left behind in the heat of the moment. While the lab worked on the biological evidence, the digital and physical detectives were scouring the town. It was a local jeweler's log that provided the first crack in the case. A gold wedding band had been sold just hours after Lucy was last seen alive. But the breakthrough wasn't just the ring itself, it was the condition of the ring. Under a microscope, forensic jewelers found something Grant never expected. The ring hadn't been gently removed. There were microscopic abrasions and traces of DNA trapped in the intricate setting, DNA that didn't just belong to Lucy but to the man who had forcefully taken it. In his greed to strip the blood money from her hand, Grant had literally fused his identity to the evidence. But just as the police moved in to make the arrest, Grant threw a wrench into the gears of justice. During his first formal interview, he didn't just deny the crime. He offered a truth that nearly derailed the entire operation. He admitted he was there. He admitted he saw Lucy. But then he pointed the finger at a phantom. Grant claimed that while he was with Lucy, a mysterious third party, a man he refused to fully name out of fear for his life, had burst in and committed the act while he hid in terror. He painted himself as a traumatized witness, a victim of circumstance who only took the jewelry as payment for his silence. For a few tense hours, the investigation had to pivot. Was there a second man? Was Grant a coward or a killer? This is where the forensic puzzle became a trap. Detectives went back to the CCTV. They went back to the neighbors. If a third man had entered Bath Street, he would have left a trail. They tracked every car, every pedestrian, and every digital ping in the area for a 6-hour window. The result? Total silence. The mysterious stranger was a fiction, a ghost conjured in an interrogation room to mask a singular, lonely guilt. To seal the case, the lab returned a final, damning report. A knife found at the scene carried a mixture of DNA. On the handle, the profile was clear: Thomas Grant. There was no third man. There was only a guest who had stayed too long and a victim who had been too kind. The phantom was nothing more than the last desperate lie of a man who realized the science had finally caught up to him. With the forensic net closed, the case moved from the lab to the courtroom. But even with the DNA, even with the ring, Grant had one more card to play. He wasn't going to go down without trying to destroy Lucy's reputation one last time. The trial of Thomas Grant began in August 2023 at Stafford Crown Court, a building designed to make a man feel the heavy, historic weight of the law. For 5 weeks, the air in that room was thick with a singular, harrowing question. How does a man justify the betrayal of the very person who tried to save him? Grant, however, didn't come to apologize. He came to fight. The defense strategy was as desperate as it was transparent. They attempted to paint Thomas Grant not as a predator, but as a victim of a cruel society and a spiraling addiction. They argued that he was in a state of diminished responsibility, a man so hollowed out by his dependency on substances that he was no longer the pilot of his own soul. It was a dark defense, one that tried to shift the blame from the man to the chemicals in his blood. But the prosecution was relentless. They didn't just show the jury the DNA, they showed them the logic of the crime. They pointed to the Boxing Day pawn, the cold, calculated act of walking into a shop while his benefactor lay cold in her home. A man in a fog of addiction, the prosecutor argued, does not have the presence of mind to wipe a phone, hide a body, and haggle for the best price on a wedding ring. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the gallery became a physical thing. The jury was forced to look at photos of the home Lucy had tried to make a sanctuary, now a grid of yellow markers and forensic dust. Grant sat in the dock, often described by those present as chillingly detached. He wasn't a man fighting for his life, he was a man waiting for a bus. This detachment would ultimately be his undoing. Then came the moment that broke the professional veneer of the court. Lucy's mother stood to deliver her victim impact statement. In a voice thin with a grief that no sentence could ever heal, she spoke not of the murder but of the woman. She spoke of Lucy's beautiful smile, her selfless nature, and the unbearable silence that now filled their family gatherings. She didn't just lose her life, her mother said, she lost her belief that the world was a kind place. And we lost our light. Every person in that room, from the bailiffs to the journalists, was reminded that this wasn't just a legal puzzle. This was a theft of a future. The statement grounded the million-view spectacle in raw human reality. It reminded the jury that while Grant was arguing about responsibility, a mother was mourning a daughter whose only crime was an open heart. The verdict took only a few hours. Guilty. But it was the sentencing remarks of Judge Michael Chambers that provided the final, stinging rebuke. He didn't just hand down a number. He delivered a lecture on the sanctity of the home. He described the attack as horrific, cruel, and exceptionally violent. He noted that Grant had repaid Lucy's kindness with the ultimate betrayal, and for that, there could be no leniency. Life imprisonment. A minimum of 25 years and 152 days. In the eyes of the law, Thomas Grant would be an old man before he ever felt the sun on his face without a barred window in the way. As he was led down to the cells, he remained as he had started. Silent, slumped, and seemingly indifferent to the wreckage he had left behind. The trial was over and the ghost of Bath Street was finally behind bars. But for the town of Cannock, the healing was only just beginning. Because while the killer was gone, the questions he left behind, about safety, about kindness, and about the strangers we let into our lives, would remain forever. The sirens have long since faded from the streets of West Chadsmoor. The yellow tape has been cleared away, and the house at 19 Bath Street has a new set of keys, a new coat of paint, and perhaps, eventually, a new silence. But for those who knew Lucy Clews, the world didn't simply return to normal. You don't just move on from a tragedy that happened because you were a good person. Lucy's legacy isn't defined by the way she died, but by the way she lived. In the months following the trial, the community of Cannock didn't retreat into shadows. Instead, they did the one thing Thomas Grant tried to destroy: they looked out for one another. Lucy is remembered as the Lady of the Hearth, a woman who believed that a cup of tea and a warm word could fix the unfixable. This case forces us into a difficult, almost painful reflection. We are taught from childhood that kindness is a virtue, that we should help the traveler, feed the hungry, and comfort the lonely. But Lucy's story presents us with the price of kindness. It asks the viewer, in a world where predators use empathy as a map, is it still safe to be soft? To stop being kind is to let the Thomas Grants of the world win twice. If we lock our doors to everyone because of the actions of one, we lose the very thing that makes us human. Lucy's choice to open her door wasn't a mistake of judgment, it was a testament to her character. The fault lies solely with the man who mistook a sanctuary for an opportunity. As the years pass, the legal files on the Clews case will gather dust. Thomas Grant will become a number in a database, a ghost behind a steel door. But Lucy's story remains a North Star for the community. It's a reminder that even in the deepest midwinter, there are those who will keep the lights on for a stranger, not because it is safe but because it is right. We leave Lucy where she would want to be, not in a courtroom, not in a headline, but in the company of the man she loved and lost. A woman whose heart was too big for this world, finally at peace and finally home. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the anatomy of a betrayal. If Lucy's story touched you, please share a thought in the comments below. And remember, never let a cold world make you cold. Good night.